Welcome to the Minnesota Gambling Control Board Gambling Manager Seminar Review Sessions. Some general notes regarding these review sessions and tips moving forward. The sessions are optional and are not required for Gambling Manager licensure. The sessions are also not intended to be a replacement for the Gambling Manager Seminar class, which has much more comprehensive information. Rather, the sessions focus on some of the more impactful items to consider when getting started in your gambling operation and on historically troublesome areas of compliance. Each review session corresponds to roughly 1/3 of the Gambling Manager Seminar class, and each session recording can be briefly paused if needed to allow for further consideration of, or even further research of, an elusive topic. At the end of each session, some quiz questions will be both asked and answered. Note that the questions for the quiz come from the current day's review material or simply from the Gambling Manager Seminar class at large. A very important reminder: if there is ever any gray area in your mind as to the answer to a given question stemming from your gambling operation, it is essential to reach out to your county's compliance or licensing specialist for a definitive answer. We all know from daily life that assumptions sometimes prove incorrect, and in the case of charitable gambling, incorrect assumptions can and often do lead to reimbursements of monies back to the gambling account, citations, and/or other repercussions. Organizations that are regularly in contact with their Gambling Control Board specialists almost without exception more effectively stay compliant with gambling statute and rule, meaning fewer citations or other sanctions, and also meaning generally less eventful or troublesome compliance audits and inspections. Review session number 3. Today's review topics include inventory types and purposes and internal controls. Inventory types and purposes. There are 3 main types of inventory used in a gambling operation. We will consider the functions of each of the 3 types here, as well as how they interrelate to present a full picture of your gambling operations game and bingo stock inventory. First, though, we should address a common question that some incoming gambling managers have. Why is there so much emphasis placed on gambling inventory tracking? The answer is that gambling-related inventory is a frequent theft target. If individuals can get their hands on unplayed pull-tab games, bingo sheets, or the like, they can use them to fraudulently participate in gambling and/or claim prizes. Careful and frequent inventory tracking helps prevent this type of fraud and can in turn reduce or eliminate your organization's potential accountability should games or bingo stock go missing by dishonest means. The first type of inventory required to be kept for a gambling operation is the perpetual inventory. In essence, perpetual means enduring or everlasting, so you can think of perpetual inventory as a permanent, ongoing record of all games or bingo stock that have historically come through your organization's gambling operation. Form LG 844, shown here, is required to document all bar-coded games such as paper pull tabs, tip boards, and paddle tickets. For bingo stock, the required form is the LG 900, the LG 901, or the LG 902, depending on whether your organization is selling individual bingo sheets, commingled paper, or bingo packages, respectively. Our main focus here for illustrative purposes will be on paper pull-tab games and thus on Form LG 844. A reminder that if your organization is using gambling management software, the equivalent of each of these forms are likely available within your software. Such software is recommended for a variety of reasons, but accurate and efficient inventory management is prominent among them. Getting back to Form LG 844, let's look at an example of your organization getting a shipment of 7 new pull-tab games from your distributor. Upon order and invoicing, the 7 games are listed each in their own row on the 844, occupying the space shown in yellow on the form here. Columns 9 and 10, the in-play date and the game close date, shown in the blue area here, are filled in later when appropriate. As game orders continue to be placed, the perpetual inventory record simply grows from there, adding new sheets as needed. The perpetual inventory record is kept for the customary 3.5 years, meaning that once all games on a sheet were removed 3.5 years ago or more, that inventory sheet can simply be discarded or recycled. Provided that this process is handled methodically and accurately, then any inquiries that might arise about ownership or playing dates for any particular game coming through your operation in the last 3.5 years can be readily and efficiently addressed. Let's now turn our attention to a second required type of inventory for gambling operations, the site inventory, which is entirely separate from the perpetual inventory record. You can think of site inventory as a dynamic, constantly changing snapshot of games and bingo stock at a given gambling site. Specifically with regards to games, the site inventory needs to, at all times, accurately indicate all unplayed games and all in-play games at the site. Thus, the site inventory needs to be updated by gambling staff each and every time a game is put into play or taken out of play. Form LG 847, shown here, was designed to track site inventory. The LG 847 will be requested by inspectors coming from the Gambling Control Board or the Minnesota Department of Revenue or even the Department of Public Safety that are coming to inspect the site, and it must be fully up to date to avoid violations or other repercussions. Such inspections take place on both a scheduled and on an unscheduled basis. Site inventory is required to be readily and immediately available for all inspections, and for that reason Form LG 847, or its equivalent, is kept in hard copy form at a site and is not generally available in gambling management software. For many years, entering all game information on the LG 847 site inventory listing by hand was a time-consuming process for gambling organizations. Fortunately, game distributors stepped forward with a solution that saves gambling organizations significant time, including in each shipment a document intended to serve as the site inventory for that particular shipment of games. Most of the information from Form LG 847, except for the in-play and close dates for the games, is pre-filled by the distributor in this document. From that point, maintaining an accurate site inventory is essentially a matter of gambling staff entering in the in-play and close dates on the document when appropriate. Once all such dates for a given shipment's document have been entered, then that particular document can simply be discarded. Retaining it is not required since the perpetual inventory is the permanent record of all games that have come through the operation. Removing the documents at that point actually helps reduce paper clutter at the site. Most game distributors now offer such pre-populated site inventory sheets with their shipments. If your organization is not currently receiving them, we suggest you inquire with your distributor. Before we move on from the topic of site inventory and site inspections, a few thoughts on a means of helping your gambling staff feel more prepared for site inspections themselves. First, it is strongly recommended to have a 3-ring binder at the site in which you can store materials for inspections. The binder is ideally divided into 3 main sections. The first of those is dedicated to storing the site inventory documentation just discussed. The second section can be used to store invoices for these same game shipments, which are also required to be kept on site. The invoices establish that the games listed are in fact licensed to your organization for play at that site. The third section of the binder can be more of a catch-all section, which can contain other required documents or other gambling-related information that you as an organization wish to have handy. If your organization is conducting electronic gaming at a site, one required item that comes to mind to put in the third section would be an invoice on distributor letterhead, showing how many electronic gaming devices are licensed to the site and the serial numbers of each. In practice, gambling staff update such a binder immediately each time a shipment of games arrives at the site by inserting a copy of the pre-populated site inventory document from the distributor into the first section, and by inserting a copy of the distributor invoice from the same shipment into the second section. Once all games on a given site inventory document have been played, both the site inventory document and its corresponding invoice can be removed from the binder. Keeping an organized 3-ring binder in this fashion generally lends itself to more positive inspection results, and thus is well worth the time. Let's turn now to the third and final type of required inventory in a gambling operation, the physical month-end inventory. This inventory was discussed previously in some detail in review session number 2 as one of a few gambling-related monthly processes and procedures. Recall from that discussion that the physical month-end inventory is actually a process during which games that theoretically should be present at a given site based on the perpetual inventory record are physically verified to still be at the site. The games theoretically present at the site are listed on the form shown here, Form LG-846, and the list is then physically taken to the site by someone other than the person who orders and maintains the perpetual inventory, and this other person verifies that the games actually at the site precisely matches the list. For those with gambling management software, the LG-846 is typically built into the software, and the list of games to verify can be printed directly from the software itself and provided to the verifier. Recall that the verifier must conduct this verification within the first few days of the following month, and that they must sign and date the physical inventory listing upon completion of the verification process. If any discrepancies are found that cannot be explained, or games are verified to be missing, it is essential to report the situation to authorities immediately, as previously discussed. Note that because the physical month-end inventory list of games is a theoretical list based on the perpetual inventory record, it goes without saying that maintaining an accurate perpetual inventory record is essential for the physical month-end inventory process to go smoothly. Let's consider a brief example of the interplay between the perpetual inventory and the physical month-end inventory. Think back to our basic case discussed earlier today when an organization orders and receives 7 games at a gambling site, which is just getting started with gambling. Let's assume that the organization plays and closes 1 game during this same month, and when the month ends, 2 more of the games are still in play. That accounts for 3 of the 7 games, leaving 4 others unaccounted for. Since both unplayed and in-play games are tracked in the month-end physical inventory for a site, the LG-846 physical month-end inventory list in this example would include a total of 6 games, 2 that are in play as of month-end, and 4 more that are unplayed. The verifier takes the list of 6 games to the site during the first 2 or 3 days of the next month, verifies that all games are present, and then signs and dates the form. The physical inventory form itself is then stored in organizational records for the customary 3½ years. Now let's change gears and move on to today's other main review topic, internal controls. It's hard to overemphasize the importance of strong internal controls in a charitable gambling operation. You can think of internal controls as essential, built-in checks and balances in the operation. These checks and balances, based on statute and rule requirements, ensure that the various duties in a gambling operation are spread across several individuals. In essence, persons performing certain duties in a gambling operation are prohibited from performing certain other ones. Spreading the duties out in this way helps ensure that inadvertent errors occurring within the gambling operation are detected and resolved in a timely manner, and also helps reduce incidents of theft or other unethical behaviors. One example of this type of built-in check and balance in a gambling operation is that the auditor of a closed pull tab game cannot have acted as a seller for the game and also cannot be the person depositing proceeds from the game into the gambling account. This means then that if your organization's normal pull tab game auditor happens to serve as an emergency seller for a pair of pull tab games that were in play when someone calls in sick, a different auditor would then need to perform the final audits for those two particular games. A tremendous resource for organizations in considering and managing their own internal controls is Form LG-202, a 4-page form downloadable from the Gambling Control Board website. A completed copy of Form LG-202 is required to be stored in your organizational records and should be updated each time persons involved in gambling conduct either enter or leave the gambling operation. We'll consider the LG-202 in some detail here to help gain an understanding of how internal controls work and their importance in a well-run charitable gambling operation. Page 1 of the form, shown here, provides information pertaining to typical gambling manager duties, as well as duties typically performed by an assistant gambling manager. Let's first take a look at typical gambling manager duties, highlighted in yellow here. Take a moment to study the list, pausing the recording if needed. As you can see, a gambling manager has extensive involvement in a gambling operation. That said, one point to understand is that the gambling manager is not required or expected to exclusively handle all of these duties. Rather, the expectation is that as the primary overseer of the gambling operation, a gambling manager must have working knowledge of each of these areas. Involving other organizational members to help accomplish these tasks is normal and expected, but oversight of the operation is unique to the gambling manager role and cannot be delegated. Next, let's consider an assistant gambling manager's typical roles and duties. Take a moment to look through the duties shown in blue here. An unfortunate aspect of the title of assistant gambling manager is that outside of charitable gambling, the term assistant carries a very general meaning as someone that is simply helping in some way. In charitable gambling, however, the term assistant gambling manager has a very specific and legal meaning. This is important because individuals that formally qualify as assistant gambling managers for a given gambling operation are not at all allowed to be involved in the conduct of gambling for any other gambling operations in the state. Accordingly, as an incoming gambling manager, one prudent step you can take when beginning your role is asking your gambling staff whether any of them are involved in the conduct of gambling for any other organizations in the state. If anyone's answer to that is yes, then you will want to collaborate with them to ensure that they do not inadvertently qualify legally as a formal assistant gambling manager for your organization, which would in turn require them to cease their work with the other licensed gambling organization. How then does someone qualify as an assistant gambling manager? There are two main ways to do so. The first of those is performing any one of the essential duties listed in the first 4 bullet points shown in blue here. For example, if someone involved in the operation performs hiring, firing, or disciplining of gambling employees, then that alone formally qualifies them as an assistant gambling manager. The second means of qualifying as an assistant gambling manager is through sheer volume of involvement in the gambling operation, specifically by performing 6 or more of the 17 duties listed on pages 2 and 3 of this same form. We will look more closely at those pages and duties momentarily, but suffice it to say that the LG-202 is a useful resource in helping ensure that persons who happen to be involved in both your gambling operation and at least one other operation in the state can lawfully continue in each of those capacities. Pages 2 through 4 of the LG-202 provide detail on 27 common duties performed in a gambling operation, with the 17 duties listed on pages 2 and 3, shown here, being most prominent among them. The LG 202 spells out restrictions on who can do what in a gambling operation in a couple of different ways. The first of those is through the use of dark gray shading on the form to indicate persons or parties that should not be performing a given duty. For example, duty number 1 is preparing reports submitted to the Gambling Control Board and to the Minnesota Department of Revenue. The dark gray shading in the lessor columns, highlighted in the red box here, indicates that the lessor should of course not be the party that is preparing and submitting these monthly reports on behalf of your organization. The columns of the various other parties listed are all white, indicating that having any of these parties perform the monthly reporting is allowable. The second means by which restrictions are communicated on the LG 202 is through the use of boldface type, to emphasize cases where performing certain duties in the gambling operation specifically prohibits an individual from performing certain other duties. Let's consider duty number 13 as an example, which is acting as the final auditor of closed games. The verbiage highlighted in green shows that final auditors do have some restrictions on what else they can do in a gambling operation. Specifically, the boldface verbiage specifies that the final auditor cannot, as discussed previously, have acted as a seller for the game or prepare and make deposits of the game's proceeds, highlighted as duties 8 and 9 in the blue box shown here. Finally, the boldface verbiage from duty number 13 also specifies that final auditors are not allowed to perform duty number 25. Duty number 25 is described on page 4 of the LG 202 and is highlighted in blue here. This duty entails an organizational requirement to conduct occasional spot audits of previously closed and audited games. Such spot audits must be performed regularly, perhaps every couple of months or so, plus or minus. The idea is to randomly select 2 or 3 previously audited games for re-audit so that the accuracy of the previous audits can be determined. This is important because auditors sometimes over time grow careless or ineffective in their work, or can even begin to engage in fraudulent behaviors such as stealing of gambling funds and falsifying records. Random spot audits can help unearth these serious concerns, but they must of course be conducted by someone other than the normal final auditor in order to effectively do so. That concludes our look at the LG 202, but there is a wealth of other very helpful information on this form, so be sure when time permits to give it a thorough look over. If you or your organization have remaining questions after looking over and completing the LG 202, be sure as always to reach out to your county's compliance specialist. And now for today's review session quiz. A reminder that the questions for the quiz come either from material discussed today or from the Gambling Manager class at large. As you work your way through the quiz, feel free to pause the recording so that you have time to fully consider or even research a given question before its answer is then provided. Good luck! Question number 1, true or false? 2 member signatures are required on all checks from the gambling account. Also, are 2 signatures still required for electronic debits? Answer, true. Note that both of the signatories do need to be currently active members. Most organizations have 3 or 4 overall signatories to cover for others that are out sick, on vacation, or the like. Also note that 2 signatures are still required in cases where there is any electronic debiting taking place from the gambling account. Since there is obviously no check to sign for electronic debits, the 2 signatures are actually applied to another organizational financial document, such as the gambling account bank statements. Many groups handle this by simply presenting the bank statement each month at the monthly meeting and having 2 members look through the statement and then sign and date it. Their signature confirms that they have reviewed all electronic debits appearing on the statement and believe them to be legitimate, approved gambling expenditures. Question number 2, true or false? An organization's treasurer understands money so it should be one of the two people signing gambling account checks. Answer: false. Recall that with only some very specific isolated exceptions, money should not be moving back and forth between the gambling account and an organization's general fund. A related restriction is that the individual in an organization managing their general fund monies must be different than the person managing the gambling account monies. This means that an organization's treasurer cannot be involved in managing or even handling of gambling account monies, and so of course cannot act as a signatory on the gambling account. Question number 3. True or false? Prior membership approval is required for all gambling expenditures, except those that the gambling manager deems important. Answer: false. Membership pre-approval is required for all gambling-related expenditures, period. The gambling manager's job is to bring knowledge, expertise, and recommendations to the membership about how gambling monies are to be spent, but they do not at all have authority to unilaterally approve or disapprove gambling-related expenditures. Question number 4. True or false? As part of transparency, gambling managers should delegate oversight of the operation to others. Answer: false. A bit of a tricky one here, since transparency always sounds good, right? However, one of the core, essential duties for a gambling manager is oversight of the gambling operation, and this oversight should not be delegated to others. In short, the gambling manager is expected and required to be reasonably in the know about all aspects of the gambling operation. Question number 5. How long are gambling records required to be kept? Answer: gambling records must be kept for 3½ years. Question number 6. How many continuing education classes must a gambling manager complete each calendar year to maintain their gambling licensure? Answer: 1. One such class must be completed between January and December each year. The Gambling Control Board website has links to several online continuing education classes that meet this requirement, and in-person classes are also occasionally offered. Note that this seminar satisfies the requirement for the current calendar year, and so new gambling managers will not need to concern themselves with completing a continuing education class until next year. That concludes review session number 3 of the Gambling Manager Seminar. Thanks for listening.